Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture, we'll take a look at conditional functions in Excel, starting with the if function and then taking a look at nested if statements, the ifs function, and then finally the IFERROR function. Within our movies spreadsheet, we have a column for the runtime of the film, which we can see over here in column O. Currently, we only have the value in minutes, but it may be helpful for our analysis to categorize them into different durations, like short, medium, long, and very long, for instance. To do this, we can use the if function. Let's create a new column in column P to summarize the movie length. And I'll just give this column a heading of movie length, and then we can start our functions below in cell P2. And like last time, we'll start our function with the equal sign, but this time we can call the if function. And as we can see from Microsoft's description, this function checks whether a condition is true and returns one value if it is true and another value if it's false. And the first argument that we need to provide for the if function is the logical test. And in this case, our logical test will be to check and see if the runtime is less than 80 minutes. So we can say cell O2 and then less than 80. And we'll enter our comma to move on to our value if true. And if it is true, we'll say that it's a short film. So we'll open a set of quotes, then just write in short. And then finally, our value if false will be long. So let's go ahead and close our parentheses, and then we can hit enter. And then if we autofill this function down for the rest of our movies, looking down our spreadsheet, we can see here that in row 73 for our movie Bon Voyage, Charlie Brown, we have a short film. And looking at our runtime, we can see that yes, it does have a duration of 75 minutes, so less than 80. It's quite possible though that we may also want to check for multiple conditions. So currently, anything less than 80 is classed as short, and anything greater is classed as long, which isn't necessarily that accurate. We'll probably want some values in between this. To achieve this, we can create what's called a nested if statement in order to check multiple conditions. So we go back up to the top of our spreadsheet in our first cell for this column, which was cell P2, and then update our function. Let's first get rid of our value if false, and then instead of providing fixed text like we did before, we'll instead insert another if function. And this time, our logical test will be if the runtime is less than or equal to 120, then the movie length will be classed as medium, and if this is false, then we'll have the value set to long. So we've just added an intermediary categorization here. So now we have short, medium, and long. And again, using the autofill handle to drag this down for the rest of our rows. And looking down our spreadsheet now, any film with a duration of less than 120 minutes is classed as medium, less than 80 is classed as short, and anything greater than 120 is classed as long. And just to confirm, our previous film, so Bon Voyage, Charlie Brown, is still classed as a short film. And finally, just to demonstrate, I'll add in one more nested if statement, and our final condition will be to check for any films that are less than 180 minutes in length. And as before, these will just be classed as long, but for any films that are greater in length, where the value is false, these will be classed as very long. So delete our final if false value and add in another if statement. Then our logical test will be less than 180. Our value if true, and then here our value if false, which is very long. So you could of course have set our function up the other way around here, and had any values that are greater than or equal to 180 be very long, and the false values be long, but whichever way you do this really comes down to your personal preference. And just to finally check this, everything looks okay, and then yep, here in row 23 we have a film with a runtime of 290 minutes, and this has been categorized as a very long film. At this point, we could add in even more nested if statements for as many conditions as we wanted to check. And in fact, Excel supports up to 64 nested if statements. But as we can already see, even with a couple of nested if statements, it's already getting a little bit hard to manage, and the functions are becoming quite cluttered. To address this challenge, Microsoft introduced a function called ifs. And essentially, ifs is a streamlined function for handling multiple conditions in Excel. Instead of stacking numerous nested if statements together, like we have here, the ifs function allows us to evaluate multiple conditions in a more readable manner, making our formulas easier to maintain and understand. So let's now convert our current nested if statement into an ifs function so that we can see the difference between the two. Just to compare the results, I'll leave the if statement as it is in column P, and then add our ifs statement in the next column, so in column Q. And I'll just call this column ifs for easy referencing. So we'll start with our function name, which is ifs, and then we have our first logical test, which will be the same of is cell O2 less than 80, in which case our first value, if true, will be short, and then note here that in our list of arguments we can enter a second logical test. So whereas before we had to enter another if statement, we can do this in line here within the same ifs statement. And our second test will be is cell O2 less than or equal to 120, and then our next value, if true, will be medium. So I'll go through and do this for the rest of our conditions. And one thing I'd like to show you here is that for our last condition, instead of specifying greater than or equal to 180, we could also simply use true. Since we've already covered all the other conditions, any value beyond those thresholds will trigger the very long return. But to keep things simple, I'll leave it as it is. But this shorthand option is just something to keep in mind that we could have used for the last condition. And here, just to quickly compare our values, we can see that the ifs has produced the same result of our nested if statement. And then the final function that I'd like to show you in this lecture is the IFERROR function. And IFERROR is a function that can be used to nicely handle errors in Excel. And to demonstrate this, let's now create an ROI column, which will simply calculate the return on investment for each movie. And the formula for this will simply be the gross revenue minus the budget divided by the budget of the film. Let's create this column in column R, and I'll just call mine ROI. And then below this, I'll enter the formula. So we have the movie's gross revenue in column M, minus the budget in column L, and this divided by the budget, which again is in column L. And then we'll just quickly format this as a percentage. We can see here for our first film, which was The Shining, it had an ROI of 147%. But if we now autofill this down, we'll see that for some movies, we get a div 0 error. And the reason for this is if we look at the budget and gross values for these films, we can see that we have some missing values. So basically, Excel is trying to divide by a 0, which of course results in an error. Instead of leaving our dataset filled with lots of errors, we can instead use the IFERROR function to handle these errors in a nicer way. We'll select our formula, and then at the start, just after our equal sign, we'll enter the function name, which is IFERROR, and then open our set of parentheses. Our value will just be the formula, and then in the result of an error, we'll simply return missing values. And now if we fill this again, we'll see that for the rows where we have missing data and previously got an error, we now instead get a nice message telling us that we had missing values for that row. So these are the main conditional functions that you'll be using inside of Excel. In the next lecture, we'll take a look at some of the text-based functions like left, mid, and right.